Yeah, I'm actually here. All right, so here we go, guys. We're starting up our classification. This is the last part of our intro unit for science, and hopefully some of it will be familiar to you, especially as we get started here. So, hopefully you guys remember this guy, this pretty kitty. Remember? It was a mountain lion in New York, but it was a cougar in, I think that was Montana, a panther in Florida. Like, it has a lot of local names. The problem is we don't want local names. We want scientific names. So once we start using Latin to name all of these, then we wanted to try to group them together so that when we saw or discovered some new animal, we could see who it shared characteristics with, who it shared traits with, because that would give us a good idea about how it lives. So while we are seeing a mountain lion here, let's imagine somewhere out in California, somebody were to see one, but the locals, instead of calling it a cougar or a mountain lion or whatever, they called it a rock cat. All right, they may not right away know that it's the same thing that we have already been working with. But if they go to classify it, they will see other animals that are very like it and then go, okay, well, what do these other animals do? So we can get an idea what this animal does. Believe it or not, this classification idea is something that we do automatically. If you see a bug that you've never seen before, your brain will immediately start to try to organize it based on what it's shaped like and what traits you can see to try to determine, will it bite me? Can it sting me? Is this dangerous? Like, your brain will do all of that. This method is just slowing the process down and making sure that we apply the right amount of science to it in order to try to get the best answer we can. So this is a fancy term. We call it binomial nomenclature. And once again, everything's in Latin. So if we break it down, bi, like a bicycle, means two wheels. Well, binomial means two numbers. And nomenclature is a really fancy term for its name or its title. So binomial nomenclature just means this Latin name that we're all familiar with. Homo sapien, Palinurus vulgaris, Ursus arctus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you've all seen this before. This is the classic Linnaeus classification, and it goes from our biggest category, the kingdom level. So the kingdom of Animalia will include insects, fish, snake, bird, pig, dog, panda, black bear, grizzly bear, right? All of these are animals. Now, at every step that we move down from kingdom, we are narrowing and narrowing and narrowing the field. So in the phylum level of Chordata, we get rid of the insect. Insects do not have a backbone, so they are not part of phylum Chordata. Then down to class Mammalia. The fish and the snake are eliminated because they are, well, fish and reptiles, not mammals. Then the order Carnivora, we can get rid of the pig because a pig is an omnivore. Down to the family Ursidae. Now the dog is out. While the dog was an animal with a backbone and a mammal and a carnivore, it is not part of the bears, which is what Ursidae means. Then the genus Ursus will limit out the panda bear because it's so distantly related. And then finally, if we're looking for the grizzly bear, this is what gives us our binomial nomenclature. It is the genus Ursus and the species Horribilis. So the grizzly bear is Ursus horribilis. That's its two-part name. Now, you will need to know these in order. My suggestion is a mnemonic device. People have been using them for a long, long time. If you've ever seen this before, you probably heard something along the lines of King Philip came over for grape soda. There are thousands of different varieties of it, some of them less school appropriate than others, but whatever one you can use that will keep these letters in order will help you out a ton. If you can keep the letters in order, you can generally answer any of the questions. So King Philip came over for grape soda. KPCOFGS. Now, this, once again, is kind of bringing it back down, except this is wrong. It's not Ursus arctos. It's Ursus horribilis. Ursus arctos would be the polar bear. Same idea, though. At each step down, we can eliminate something. And then another one. And then another one. Now, these are the major kingdoms in classic biology. You don't need to know all of them. You don't even need to worry about them for the 9th grade regions. But just know that they're out there. Recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking like 30 years ago, science decided to change things into domains. So we have the bacteria domain, the archaea domain, and the eukarya domain. If you take a look, plants, fungus, animals, almost all of our microbes are over here. The only thing that's in the rest of this are different types of bacteria. That's it. So it's pretty easy to remember, and don't worry about that. The regions still, to date, 30 years later, still has not bothered to update for the domains. Now, the problem with classification is pretty straightforward. All right, we see two different large animals in these two pictures. The top one here, think for a moment, see if you can identify it. This is a whale shark. The bottom one here, just about everybody will say it's a whale. This is a humpback whale. Now, the problem is that with the old classification method, these two were in the same group. Now, if you don't see a problem with that, you need to understand this is a fish. This is a mammal. This one has a vertical tail, breathes through gills, is cold-blooded, and lays eggs. This one has a horizontal tail, like plane wings, breathes air with lungs, is warm-blooded, and gives live birth. So these two animals were very, very different from each other. But with the earliest levels of classification, when people looked at them, they saw two huge swimming animals that both eat smaller swimming animals. And so they classified them together. All right, in this scenario, these are barnacles up top. And barnacles build this really calcium-heavy shell kind of around themselves. Now, if you were asked, who are these barnacles closer related to just by looking at them? Would you pick the crab, or would you pick clams and mussels? Well, most people would see a shell. They'd see this little part that opens up. It's a clam and a mussel. But we now know it's actually not. It is closer related to a crab. Oh, let me go back for a moment. Sorry. Inside this home is this tiny little shrimp-like thing, and it builds the rest of this home around itself. This doorway you see here, these two sides that slam together like sci-fi blast doors, that's actually the arms of the shrimp, and it builds these big shields on it so that when the water goes away, it can close them, and it can keep itself safe. So the problem with Linnaeus's classification was that it was totally based on appearance. You take a look here, a dolphin, and these are dolphin fish. They were put into the same category because, once again, they look kind of similar with that forehead melon thing, and that they swim in the water and they eat other things. And barnacles, like we mentioned, look like clams, even though they are not related to them. So we needed to move beyond that. And modern classification has now made use of DNA, the great equalizer. Take a blood sample, run its DNA, and then compare it to see who it's related to. So this is a harbor seal. You can see its feet right here. What is this? You'll notice the feet are very similar to it. And if you said that that's a polar bear, you would be right. very close relatives, except for the polar bear is the primary predator of the seal. So it's eating its cousin. When we take a look at something like an elephant, physically, we think they look a lot more like a manatee down here. The same thick gray skin, a similar face if you got rid of the trunk and the tusks. But, we assume they're closely related in size and shape and color. But believe it or not, this is the closest relative other than other elephants, obviously. These two genetically are closer than these two. So classification is constantly working to try to find better and better explanations and better ways of grouping organisms so that we can tell exactly what characteristics they may or may not have. And that brings us to something like our cladogram. And all this is our way to organize species based on how many characteristics they share. Each of these dashes indicate where new traits appeared. So this first one was going to be cartilage in their skeleton. So we see it includes everything because we all have cartilage in our skeleton. But this one right here is bones in the skeleton. Well, the sharks are out. Sharks only have cartilage for their skeleton. But the bony fishes and everything else, we all have bones. And each step would just show kind of how they separate and radiate out from each other. And finally, this is the last thing that we're going to be working on this week, and that is making a biological key in order to identify organisms step by step. So looking at this organism, does it have feathers? Yes or no? Well, hopefully looking at it, you say no. No feathers. All right, does it have legs? Yes or no? Yes, it's a lizard. All right, that is a step-by-step classification. Simplified, but that's basically all it is. Now, these tend to be written up as more complicated things like this, and this is directly out of the Regents exam. So the beak is relatively long and slender, or the beak is relatively stout and heavy. Just think of the difference between long and whatever stout means. So long, you know what that is. Stout's going to be the opposite. So if we look at bird W, is this a long beak or is this a thick beak? Well, hopefully if you take a look at these four beaks, this is not the slender beak. It is thick and heavy, so we go to number 2. Is the bottom surface of the lower beak flat and straight, or is the bottom surface of the lower beak curved? So we find the bottom surface of the lower beak right here where I'm tracing the line. That is flat and straight. So we know that bird W is Geospiza. And then we can move on to X. Long and slender or stout and heavy? Stout and heavy, so we go to 2. We know it can't be the first one because we've already identified Geospiza. So the bottom surface of the lower beak is curved. Yes, it is. The bottom surface of this lower beak is curved. So we go to 3. The lower edge of the upper beak has a distinct bend, or the lower edge of the upper beak is mostly flat. So if we take a look, the lower edge of the upper beak, so this edge right here, is it distinctly bent or is it mostly flat? It is mostly flat, so we know that bird X is Platyspiza. And you could go through and identify every single bird this way. Ladies and gentlemen, that is classification. With any luck, this makes it a little bit easier for you. Refer back to this over the course of the week as necessary. Our project will build on these very same ideas. Other than that, I'll see everybody in class, and I hope you have a great day.